The temple had no name. Hidden in the misted valleys of a forgotten moon, it stood like a scar on history, untouched, unspeaking. The alien empire called it an anomaly, a relic of Earth's shattered spirit. But to those who still whispered of human pride, it was more. It was the last breath of a culture outlawed by decree, crushed under the boot of the Zorthian Concord. They had conquered Earth generations ago. Martial arts, native tongues, even memory itself, erased. A crime to remember, a death sentence to resist. Yet this temple stood, tended by a man no one dared approach, not out of fear, but reverence. He moved with purpose, spoke with silence, and bore the weight of extinction in his eyes. The executioners arrived without warning. The ground trembled beneath their dropships. Villagers scattered like dry leaves before a storm. The sky cracked open with war horns and synthetic thunder. The man in the temple, clad in black, hooded, hands forever still, did not move. They stormed the sanctuary, smashing relics with electric whips, dragging him out through the stone courtyard. Scrolls burned. Statues shattered. History wept, and he said nothing. Shackles snapped shut on his wrists. A blade was drawn across his back as a warning, but he did not flinch. They threw him to his knees in the mud. The senior officer sneered, demanding identification. The monk gave none. A file was read aloud. He was charged with harboring forbidden techniques, storing illegal records, and suspected training of rebels. The charges were vague, manufactured, recycled. They didn't matter. What mattered was the message. No place was sacred. No one was beyond reach. Even silence would be punished. A child cried in the crowd. A villager stepped forward but was struck down before a second foot moved. The people watched in frozen horror. This was justice, they were told. This was peace. Compliance enforced by terror. And yet the prisoner didn't beg, didn't curse. His breath was steady, gaze lowered. They mocked him for it. The last human warrior! They laughed. Crawling like a worm. But the laughter rang hollow. The executioners, trained killers of the Empire, kept glancing at him, expecting resistance, expecting a plea. They got nothing. Only stillness. No defiance, no weakness. Just waiting. The senior officer gave the signal. Execution was to be immediate. A ceremonial disintegration rod was drawn, a spectacle for all to see. The monk was pulled upright, forced to stand before the crowd. A final insult. He didn't resist. As the executioner raised the rod, time seemed to stretch. The air shifted. Wind moved unnaturally. Leaves spun where there had been none. The monk tilted his head slightly, not in defiance, but in permission. The executioner hesitated. A blink. A breath. The rod slipped from his fingers. A second guard stumbled. No one had touched them. The crowd held its breath. The officer barked a command. The monk remained still. Yet a third soldier suddenly fell to the ground, unmoving, neck twisted in a way bones don't allow. No one had seen movement. No gesture, no attack. Just results. The shackles clattered to the ground. Unlocked? Broken? No one knew. The monk stepped forward calmly, like walking down steps in a familiar home. The aliens stepped back. Trained killers, now unsure. Their weapons began to rise, but too slowly. One blinked, and his rifle was gone. Another screamed. His arm bent the wrong way. No blood. No cries from the monk. Just consequence. A low murmur began among the villagers. Not panic, recognition. As if they had heard of such things, in stories, in dreams. The monk walked past a broken pillar and brushed the ashes of a burned scroll off its base. A fragment remained, written in a language the aliens had banned. One of them stepped forward to destroy it. He never reached it. His knees gave out. The monk had not turned. The senior officer, now frantic, pulled a plasma cutter and aimed directly. No more games. Fire leapt forward, only to sizzle midair. The monk was gone. Not run. Not moved. Gone. He reappeared behind the officer. This time, there was no mercy. A single touch to the base of the neck, and the alien collapsed as if disconnected from reality. A whisper came, the first and only word the monk spoke. It wasn't in alien tongue. It was old. Human. Ancient. No one understood except the villagers. They began to weep, not in fear but awe. For years they believed resistance was foolish, silence was safety. But now, they realized silence had been training. The monk turned toward the jungle, disappearing between trees. The executioners had come to erase the last shadow of Earth's warrior spirit. Instead, they had found it still alive, sharper, colder, and quieter than death. And in that quiet, a message formed: you cannot kill what you cannot comprehend. The monk stood alone, unarmed, ringed by soldiers with weapons drawn and nerves fraying. His robes were torn, his face calm. The executioner stepped forward again, weapon steady, pride restored after the earlier humiliation. He announced a new sentence: immediate death by molecular implosion. No ritual, no delay. The monk watched him approach, unmoving. Then he spoke. One word, ancient and indecipherable, rolled from his lips like falling water. The translator implant stuttered, failed, and went silent. The executioner hesitated for half a second. It was enough. The monk shifted his weight, subtly, almost imperceptibly. To the watching soldiers, it looked like nothing more than fatigue. But the executioner's weapon snapped from his hands. It clattered to the ground, blade melted, grip fractured. He cried out, clutching a wrist that now hung useless. The monk hadn't moved more than an inch. Before the others reacted, another soldier doubled over, gasping. His spine bent backward unnaturally, and he collapsed without a sound. Confusion overtook discipline. Orders barked were drowned in shouting. Scanners searched for energy discharges. There were none. The monk remained at the center of it, surrounded, untouched. One by one, the soldiers faltered. A kick that landed in air left a soldier limping. A lunge missed entirely, and the attacker fell dazed. The air around the monk shimmered not with heat, but tension. He was no longer merely present, he was in control. One stepped back too quickly, stumbled over a stone, and before he hit the ground, he was unconscious. A pressure point struck mid-fall. Not a wasted motion. Desperation set in. Plasma bolts screamed through the air. They struck only dust and echoes. The monk had vanished. Then a scream tore through the line. A soldier flailed at his own rifle as it turned against him, bent into a weapon he no longer understood. Behind him, the monk reappeared, crouched, eyes closed, movements smooth and silent. He stood slowly, folding a stolen sash into his belt. Not to carry it. To bind his fingers for precision. The commander ordered a perimeter collapse, urging them to close ranks. But the soldiers didn't respond. They were too scattered, some down, some frozen, some trembling. The monk advanced without rush. A single nod. The lead guard fired. The bolt arced wide. He tried again, his weapon disassembled in his hands piece by piece, with surgical precision. The monk had reached him. A flick of the wrist. The man fell asleep before hitting the ground. A memory flickered in the minds of the villagers watching. Stories of humans who moved without noise, who struck without violence, whose power came not from brutality, but from perfect control. The Empire had called them extinct. The monk was disproving it with every breath. A second wave of troops arrived, armored and ready. They came with scanner drones and suppression fields. The monk waited. As they surrounded him, a ripple passed through their formation. One of them screamed, not from pain, but from terror. He clutched at his helmet, eyes wild, babbling about shadows that whispered his name. Another fled before his gun fired. The monk hadn't touched either. Fear did the work for him. The commander finally stepped forward, drawing his command blade, forged for ceremonial executions and elite duels. He activated it with trembling hands. "You are one man," he spat. "You are already dead." The monk tilted his head again. A mirror of the gesture that had broken the executioner's concentration earlier. The blade flickered. Its power core dimmed, overloaded. The commander didn't understand what had failed. The monk did. He moved forward. Not to kill, but to end the illusion. One precise movement disarmed the commander, another took his balance. The final touch to the throat silenced him, not with damage, but certainty. The message was clear. You were never in control. A drone captured the entire confrontation. The footage spread later, far beyond this moon. It showed a single human dismantling a unit trained for planetary enforcement. But more terrifying was what it didn't show: no visible attacks, no traceable movement, no energy weapon signature. Just absence. The monk wasn't fighting. He was erasing opposition. The remaining soldiers didn't flee, they knelt. Not in surrender. In acknowledgement. They had been taught that humans broke under pressure, shattered under rule. What they witnessed was different. This human had not resisted. He had waited. And when the moment arrived, he hadn't exploded. He had unraveled them. He walked past them now, unshackled, untouched, unarmed. The villagers stepped back as he passed, not in fear, but reverence. One of them whispered, "He never left. He just waited for them to arrive." The monk didn't speak again. He simply looked skyward, where more ships would surely come. He wasn't hiding. He was inviting. Panic spread through the ranks faster than commands could be issued. Communications were jammed, not electronically, but psychologically. No one trusted their gear, their squadmates, or even their own instincts. The monk had shifted the battlefield entirely without weapons or noise. What remained of the execution unit tried regrouping, but discipline fractured under invisible pressure. He had become a presence they couldn't trace, only feel. He moved like memory, striking where attention wasn't, retreating before eyes could follow. Each attempt to capture him ended with another soldier collapsed in perfect stillness. He used their weapons against them, not by firing, but by positioning. A plasma rifle fired at a shadow and struck another soldier. A stun net cast toward a blur instead entangled its own handler. Every misstep was exploited with inhuman calculation. The monk didn't retaliate, he redirected. Where others used force, he applied inevitability. No wasted motion, no effort beyond what precision required. One soldier turned to aim, found his arms numb, dropped to his knees before even shouting. No signs of damage. Only outcome. An officer screamed to activate the suppression grid. The generator hummed, pulsing waves meant to disable neural focus and mobility. The monk paused for the first time. Then stepped forward. With each step, the grid flickered. Not from power failure, but resonance. His movement matched the pulse, disrupting the pattern. By the time they realized it, he was inside the perimeter. The generator blinked off. He left it intact, no destruction needed. Its operator was already unconscious, slumped beside his station, nerves disconnected in silence. The villagers watched from afar, paralyzed by awe. They had been told resistance was suicide. Compliance kept them alive. But now, they saw not chaos, but elegance. Every act by the monk was intentional. He wasn't attacking an army, he was dismantling their identity. One motion at a time. A younger soldier attempted bravery, screaming as he charged. The monk let him come close. Then turned slightly. The scream stopped mid-breath. A blur, a rotation, a gentle redirection. The soldier collapsed, unharmed but unable to rise. The scream had carried no conviction. And the monk had heard it. In the heart of the encampment, he paused. Not to rest, but to allow their fear to ferment. Fear wasn't a side effect, it was a tool. The monk's silence was louder than any threat. The aliens, bred for domination, had never prepared for an enemy that didn't posture, didn't curse, didn't warn. His message came through result, not rhetoric. Scattered across the camp, the remnants of the once proud unit tried forming a defense line. No commands. Just instinct. They huddled around armored transports, assumed formations, triggered drones. One by one, the systems failed. Not because he broke them. Because they stopped believing they would work. Paranoia overrode protocol. Orders lost coherence. Drones fired randomly. A senior sergeant ordered a retreat, then vanished, his armor found upright, empty, leaning against a wall as if he'd stepped out of it by choice. A message appeared, scratched in alien blood across a metal barricade. You outlawed honor. So I mastered silence. It wasn't dramatic. It was clinical. Inevitable. Unanswered. Somewhere, a villager began to move, hesitant at first, then purposeful. A metal rod lifted. Not toward the monk, but toward the fallen alien weapons. Then another villager followed. No signal had passed between them. They understood. The monk wasn't a warrior for them. He was the proof they were never truly conquered. That obedience had been a lie accepted out of fear, not truth. The monk did not look back as others began arming themselves. His job was not to lead, only to awaken. Where one human moved with absolute mastery, others remembered they had legs. They had spines. They had voices, even if they had forgotten the words. Far above, an emergency transmission burst through subspace relays. Fragmented video. Partial translation. Panic-laced phrases. Earth never surrendered. He is not alone. We have no name for this. It wasn't a cry for reinforcements, it was a confession. The Zorathian command now knew. Silence had not meant surrender. It had meant preparation. Among the soldiers still conscious, none dared lift their rifles. They didn't flee, they froze. Not by command, but by instinct. The monk walked among them, untouched. They saw no expression in his eyes. No hatred. No pleasure. Just a stillness they couldn't disrupt. Behind him, one of the villagers placed a hand on a broken sigil, an ancient human mark-long band. He didn't know its full meaning. Only that it mattered now. A child beside him whispered, "He moves like a shadow." The monk continued walking. He didn't turn back. His task here was finished. He had not liberated a village. He had broken a belief. One that said humans had been defeated. They came in waves after the transmission reached the upper command. Orbitals darkened as the Zorathian dreadnought descended, casting the sky in artificial shadow. Hundreds of shock troops disembarked, armed with suppression arrays, adaptive targeting systems, and anti-cloaking drones designed for interspecies warfare. The monk waited alone, arms lowered, eyes calm, expression unreadable. He didn't run. He didn't hide. The invaders didn't understand this. It defied all patterns they had studied. They surrounded him, forming a perimeter wide enough to contain a small fortress. He simply stepped forward, and every sensor in the sector registered motion beyond calculated prediction. He was inside the perimeter before the alarm could process it. The soldiers, trained for rapid-fire kinetic assaults, couldn't adapt fast enough. One dropped, then two, then five. No blood, no screams, only collapsing armor. None saw the strike. Not one could describe it. Autologs showed frame skips. Time lost seconds. Some units believed there was a glitch in local space-time. Commanders requested system checks. They were answered with silence. Comms officers couldn't verify casualties because bodies vanished mid-report. Panic blossomed in sterile protocol. Reinforcements doubled patrols, layered infrared tracking with electromagnetic nets. Still, he moved undetected. One moment, a squad stood ready. The next, their formation disintegrated. Helmets removed, eyes blank, consciousness intact, but minds unreachable. They hadn't been hurt, they had been silenced. Without impact. Without threat. Just, removed. The Admiral deployed null-field agents trained to disrupt psionic patterns, but they found nothing. No frequency matched. No signal intercepted. The monk didn't operate on signals. He functioned in presence. Their tech, built to detect energy signatures and biological stress, failed. His breath didn't change. His temperature never rose. Even his shadow remained constant. They began to question if he was human at all. He didn't escalate. He didn't retaliate with fury. He applied control. He dissolved resistance through imbalance. Fire teams turned on themselves, thinking they saw him where he wasn't. One officer ordered a retreat. His soldiers, convinced they were compromised, restrained him instead. Unity fractured by suggestion alone. The monk didn't need to divide them. Their fear did it for him. Then the transmissions began. Not from him, but from distant colonies. Reports surfaced of similar incidents. A merchant governor found dead in a sealed chamber, cause unknown. A warlord assassinated mid-broadcast, his final words unfinished. Footage captured movement, then static. Every instance carried one detail: a human figure, barely visible, always alone, always leaving no trace. The Zorathian High Command reviewed the reports and identified an impossible pattern. Multiple sightings across systems, all matching the same method. The monk was not an isolated anomaly. The truth settled like ash. He was not the last. He was part of something larger. A design unseen. A doctrine revived and refined. The Seven Shadows, once dismissed as myth, surfaced in internal threat databases. Earth's supposed final resistance wasn't destroyed. It had fractured, trained, vanished, and waited. They hadn't built an army. They'd scattered ghosts. And ghosts didn't fight wars. They ended them by never being caught. The Admiral issued a lockdown. No one in or out. Every ship deployed counter-espionage nets. Officers were ordered to fire on sight. Yet the monk remained visible, calmly walking through restricted zones, unmoved by growing security. He let them see him, knowing their reactions gave him more leverage than secrecy. The more they tried to contain him, the more unstable their cohesion became. They weren't fighting an enemy. They were resisting inevitability. Morale collapsed. Some soldiers laid down arms not from failure, but from belief. The monk hadn't spoken to them, hadn't offered terms. But his presence said more than declarations ever could. A man who needed no army, no flag, no rank, and still brought a military machine to standstill was not an opponent. He was a reckoning. Across systems, the rumor took form. He wasn't just trained. He was ascended. He hadn't merely survived Earth's fall, he had transcended it. Beaten not through force, but through perfection. Human imperfection refined into absolute balance. The fear wasn't that he could kill. It was that he didn't need to. The Dreadnought's admiral, hardened by 1,000 victories, issued a final command: contain the monk, no matter the cost. That order was never completed. By the time it echoed through the bridge, the monk stood behind him, untouched by any weapon, unimpeded by the layers of armor or protocol. He didn't attack. He whispered a word never spoken in alien ears before. The admiral collapsed, not dead, but broken. Not physically. Ideologically. The monk didn't leave a message. He didn't need to. By the time he disappeared into the void, the Zorathian command had already begun recalling its forces. Not from fear of defeat, but fear of being witnessed by something they could never understand, let alone defeat. The admiral sat paralyzed, not from injury, but from realization. Every system, every order, every doctrine he had trusted now felt hollow. He had seen wars end with explosions, civilizations collapse under orbital fire, rebellions extinguished before they caught flame. But this was different. No blast. No speech. Just the weight of presence, the crushing silence of a man who refused to vanish. The monk hadn't come to overthrow a regime. He had come to expose its limits. Not by confronting its strength, but by revealing how brittle it truly was when belief dissolved. Transmission relays flickered across the empire. A shadowed figure appeared, face never shown, voice modulated by nothing more than perfect calm. You came to erase memory. You outlawed our stories, our movements, our names. And so, we learned to exist between your definitions. No threats followed. No terms offered. Just truth. It echoed through systems not as noise, but as clarity. Soldiers paused mid-mission. Civilians, once conditioned to avoid anything human, watched in silence. The image vanished, but the message remained. On distant colonies, people began carving the mark again, the forgotten symbol once branded treason. Not because they were ordered to, but because fear no longer outweighed memory. Small acts multiplied. Officers abandoned posts not out of cowardice, but confusion. What had they truly conquered if silence could undo decades of control? In the village where it began, the temple stood rebuilt. Quiet, modest, unchanged. The monk returned, not as a victor, but as a keeper. He planted where fire had consumed. Repaired what couldn't be replaced. His hands, once feared, moved with grace, tending to roots rather than rivals. Children watched him closely. He didn't speak, but they mimicked him. Balance on ropes. Breathing patterns. Movements that once belonged to myth now passed down without instruction. One child, barely able to walk straight, began blindfolded exercises. The monk observed, nodded once, and turned away. Teaching wasn't necessary. Remembering was. Across the galaxy, command centers restructured protocols. Entire divisions reassigned to contain conceptual threats. The term was never defined. No one dared explain how one man without artillery had rerouted imperial strategy. Some called it psychological warfare. Others an anomaly. But those who saw him knew better. He hadn't used psychology or strategy. He had embodied an idea they couldn't confront, unbroken will sharpened into perfection. Within the Zorathian High Tribunal, emergency councils debated evacuation plans, exit routes, and plausible deniability. Fear had metastasized not from casualties, but from a reality they hadn't prepared for. One counselor asked, "What if he isn't the last?" The silence that followed wasn't disagreement. It was dread. Meanwhile, scattered across space, others like him emerged. Quiet assassinations. Patterns of disappearance. Repeating signs. Each different. Each unmistakably human. The Empire realized it wasn't one monk, or even a coordinated force. It was the result of survival taken to its ultimate conclusion. Earth hadn't been defeated. It had gone inward. Deep. Beyond detection. And while the Empire celebrated silence as submission, Earth had weaponized it. They couldn't predict the next step because humans no longer followed predictable rules. Their resistance wasn't political. It was personal. Rooted in identity, discipline, memory. What had been labeled extinction was now evolution. The doctrine of compliance had failed because it had misunderstood the cost of forcing humanity underground. The silence they demanded had taught humans everything they needed to win. The monk sent no final message. He never named his movement. Never claimed leadership. His return to the temple wasn't retirement. It was continuity. He had become the template, not the exception. A reminder of what waited beneath forced peace. When the Empire looked into the dark now, it no longer saw rebels. It saw shapes that didn't speak, didn't warn, didn't hesitate. The monk stood in the courtyard, unmoving, watching the wind disturb the dust. Around him, time resumed its rhythm. Not rushed. Not panicked. Settled. Not because the fight was over, but because the lesson had been taught. A new chapter would be written, not in triumph, but in presence. Where the Empire ruled with noise, the monk answered with stillness. And in that stillness, empires trembled. The story didn't end in revolution. It ended in recognition. Humanity had not been erased. It had rewritten itself beyond visibility. The monk had not fought for territory or power. He had reclaimed the right to exist without permission. No further messages came. No declarations followed. Just echoes of a warning carved into memory. You outlawed our history. Now we are writing yours, in shadow.